Buongiorno, buongiorno a tutti. Da Zurigo sono Bill Emmott, giornalista, scrittore inglese, già direttore di The Economist, e sono onorato di partecipare in questo meraviglioso TEDxGrosseto, una bella città toscana. I am English, so I will speak in English. I'm in Zurich on a visit, even though I live in Ireland and the UK. I'm on a visit for a number of reasons to do with dealing with the pandemic and public policy following the pandemic, but also I've taken the opportunity to visit the site in this city where my countryman, Winston Churchill, gave a very memorable and famous speech in 1946, on the 19th of September 1946, 74 years ago, almost exactly, calling for a United States of Europe. What he was addressing is something similar to what we need to address today in our own democracies. He was addressing the natural competitiveness of nations, the way in which that nationalism, that competitiveness had led to 2 world wars during the 20th century and to terrible extremes of politics and of poverty in many countries. And he was calling for a new approach, an approach of international collaboration, an approach at a global level that would be led by the United Nations, that he had had an important part in designing, along with his collaborators Franklin Delano Roosevelt and later Harry S. Truman in the United States, but also at a European level through the creation of a European community. Churchill was an old-fashioned British imperialist. The British Empire still existed. We hadn't yet dismantled it. So he didn't actually propose that Britain should be part of this United States of Europe, but it was directly implicit in his speech that we should work alongside it, that we should be one of the interlocking circles of international collaboration, setting up institutions, setting up treaties and rules of conduct so that competition would happen between nations in a peaceful manner, a constructive manner, rather than a destructive manner. Later, when the British Empire was dismantled, of course, Britain did join the European Union, and now, very sadly, from my point of view, we've decided to leave it. We are part of the challenge to the very memory, the very legacy that Winston Churchill started the creation of in that speech in 1946. But more broadly, what we're facing now, and the subject really of our discussion for TEDxGrosseto, is a destruction, a potential self-destruction of democracy, of the West, of the network of nations that Churchill was so instrumental in helping to create after the Second World War of 1946. By the West, I mean the liberal democracy that has spread around the world, not just in the countries of Western Europe or North America, but also in Japan, in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Chile, in Mexico, in all sorts of countries all over the world. But also the connection between those liberal democracies, the sense that we share not just common values, but a set of common interests that have made us interested in the building up of international institutions, of international law, and of treaties that dictate the way in which competition between our countries is conducted, particularly the World Trade Organization, the United Nations and its various institutions, the World Health Organization, and, of course, the bilateral security treaties and multilateral ones that the United States was instrumental in setting up in the 1940s and 1950s. NATO in Europe, the US-Japan Security Treaty in East Asia, the US-South Korea Security Treaty in East Asia, the intelligence sharing network between America, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, we call the Five Eyes network. These are the fabric of the West. In 1946, when Churchill was speaking here in Zurich, we'd seen the threat of destruction played out through fascism, through war, both in Asia and in Europe, and we were very conscious of what this had wrought. Today, we are seeing a self-destruction from within, a self-destruction of liberal democracy, an undermining of some of the fundamentals of liberal democracy, but also a destruction, a fragmentation of the network of the West that we have depended upon. This is happening, in my view, for three big reasons. The first are the twin crises that we've been facing in the last decade: 2008 global financial crisis, this year the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, neither of which our governments of the West have responded to very well, by and large, some better than others, but many of them have left their own citizens disillusioned, alienated in how well they've operated. But also crises that have led to a fragmentation of our collaboration with one another, a diminishing of the perceived value of international collaboration relative to simply going it alone. Related to that is the second big threat, a loss of confidence and leadership from the most fundamental country of the West, the United States itself. Under Donald Trump, reinforcing and accelerating a pre-existing trend, but nevertheless taking it to absolutely new points, America has shown an enormous doubt in the value of international collaboration and shown a new view that essentially not just trade, but also military alliances themselves should be seen as essentially transactional, essentially trade-offs in which one country pays and the other provides, one country considers itself a winner and the other perhaps considers itself a loser. And Donald Trump, during his time in office, has considered allies, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, as being equivalent to enemies. He has also considered China and Russia to be enemies in certain respects, but what's been shocking has been his treatment of allies. So that loss of confidence and leadership in the United States has been absolutely critical. The third factor is the rise of China, and the rise of China and other big emerging economies to a new prominence in economic and political affairs, to positions close to technological leadership, do mean that the international arrangements on which we depend have to be reset and rethought to accommodate those new countries, but also to deal with any challenges that they specifically make to the rules and to the arrangements that we've come to take for granted. So those three threats have led to a fragmentation of the West. Our failure to respond well to 2008 and now to 2020 has led to a polarization in many of our own societies, a loss of much of that sense of equality, of citizenship that democracy is so good at building up, but that, if it disappears, undermines faith in democracy, and a great loss in a belief in international institutions and the value of global collaboration, something of a shift back towards a sense of a world in which dog eats dog. It's a battle of all against all, a sense of trying to triumph or perhaps trying to isolate yourself and become wholly independent in the spirit of American isolationism from the past, and perhaps, arguably, in a spirit of a former nostalgic British imperial way of thinking that lies behind some of Brexit. The self-destruction of the West is in front of us, but it is not inevitable. We can, I believe, reverse this trend. We can, I believe, restore and resurrect a sense of belief not just in the West, but also in the international institutions that are so valuable to us. How do we do that? I think, first and foremost, we have to work within our societies. Our liberal democracies need a new sense of investment in the years after the pandemic, an investment in the sense of equality of citizenship through education, through the distribution of income, through equal treatment and justice. That equality of sense of citizenship, of opportunity, of regard, is fundamental to the acceptance by citizens of the very democracy on which they depend and on which the stability of our countries depend. And we have neglected that equality over particularly the last 15 years. and let too much inequality rise and start to rot away at the heart of our societies. Second, we need a new investment in international collaboration. We need new Winston Churchills to stand up and give great speeches at universities, on social media, on television, wherever it can be done, making the case for international collaboration, the case that the pandemic really should have reinforced, because this is absolutely quintessentially a crisis in which we live together or fall together, but which has tragically been a crisis in which, while scientists have collaborated, governments have essentially competed, and governments have moved further apart from one another rather than closer together. We need statesmen, egged on by their citizens, by you and by me, to renew again their belief in the fact that if we don't collaborate, we'll be weaker. If we don't collaborate, we will harm ourselves. If we don't collaborate, we will not solve our problems. The United States of Europe was Winston Churchill's call in 1946. I'm not saying that we need a United States of the world, but what we do need is a reset of international cooperation, a reset of international institutions that bind us together, and particularly a reset of the obligation felt by country upon country to talk first and compete second, rather than the other way around. Thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish TEDxGrosseto a great success.